4 tourists vanished in the desert. It took 13 years to learn how they died. July 1996. Death Valley, the hottest place on Earth. 4 Germans rented a green minivan in Los Angeles. A mother, her boyfriend, 2 little boys, ages 4 and 11. They drove east into the desert. They took photographs. They smiled. They were never seen alive again. The van turned up 3 months later, deep in the backcountry. Tires shredded, doors open. No bodies, no blood, no note. Just sand and heat and silence. The Park Service searched. The FBI searched. German investigators flew in. Helicopters combed 1,000 square miles of nothing. They found nothing. For 13 years, 4 human beings simply did not exist. The desert had swallowed them whole and refused to spit them back out. Then one man, an off-duty cop with a hobby, decided the desert was lying. He'd been tracking ghosts for 8 years. He had a theory, a map, and a hunch that everyone else had been looking in the wrong direction. What he found out there would crack the case open. What he found would also break him. Because the truth about the Death Valley Germans isn't a mystery. It's an accusation. Act 1. The Stain. A rented van, a wrong turn. A death sentence written in sand. October 21st, 1996. A park ranger spots a green Plymouth Voyager wedged into a canyon called Anvil Spring, 40 miles from the nearest paved road. The van is wrecked, 2 tires blown, 2 tires run flat down to the rim. Someone drove this machine until it stopped being a machine and started being a coffin. Inside, chaos. Clothes scattered, a suitcase open, camera gear, children's toys, a guidebook in German, pages dog-eared, half a bottle of water, warm as bath water. Camera gear, children's toys, a guidebook in German, pages dog-eared, half a bottle of water, warm as bath water. No bodies, no bones, no blood, nothing. The Rangers radio it in. The FBI rolls out. A missing persons case that had gone cold 4 months earlier suddenly has a location and a horror. The family. Egbert Rimkus, 44, a tourist from Dresden. His girlfriend, Cornelia Meyer, 28. His son, Georg, 11. Her son, Max, 4. 4 years old. They'd flown into LAX on July 8th. They'd driven into Death Valley on July 22nd. They signed a guest book at a ghost town called Warm Springs. "We're going over the pass," Egbert wrote in German. 3 people's names. They'd lost one already, or forgotten to sign. Nobody noticed. Then they vanished. Death Valley in July. The air hits 130 degrees. The ground hits 200. A human being without water can die in 6 hours. A child in 3. The investigators stared at that wrecked van, and they understood. These people had walked. They had walked away from the vehicle, into terrain that kills helicopters, into mountains that have no name on most maps. The search spread out. Dogs, aircraft, bloodhounds choking on the heat. They combed the washes below the van. Standard protocol: a body rolls downhill. Gravity is a detective. They found nothing. They expanded. 5 miles, 10, 20. Still nothing. The heat had done something to the evidence, or the coyotes had, or the wind. The desert is a very efficient mortician. Weeks became months. The FBI quietly filed the case. 4 presumed dead. Bodies unrecovered. Cause of death unknown. In Germany, the families screamed. They hired private investigators. They flew to California. They begged the Park Service to try harder. The Park Service shrugged, politely, bureaucratically. They had hikers going missing every summer. Budgets were thin. The desert was vast. The family was gone. Case closed, unsolved, stamped, filed, forgotten, except by one man. A riot cop from Los Angeles named Tom Mahood. Retired, bored, reading the case file online at 2 a.m. like it was a crossword puzzle. He looked at the map. He looked at the van. And he said 4 words that would consume the next decade of his life. They went the wrong way. Act 2. The Shadows. The FBI gave up. A retired cop didn't. Every investigator who'd worked the case had assumed the same thing. The Germans abandoned the van. They walked south, downhill, toward the valley floor, toward water, toward civilization. That's what hikers do. That's what lost people do. Gravity and thirst both pull down. So the searchers had combed south, mile after mile, canyon after canyon. Nothing. Of course they found nothing. They were looking in the wrong place.
Tom Mahood sat in his house in Orange County, staring at a topographical map. He'd never met the Germans, never been to that canyon. He was a hobbyist, a desert rat. He liked puzzles. He noticed something the professionals had missed. The van wasn't just stuck. It had been driven into that canyon, past warning signs, over rocks that would puncture any normal tire. Egbert Rimkus had made a series of increasingly stupid decisions, each one deeper than the last. Why? Why keep driving? Why not turn around? Mahood dug into Egbert's background. Divorced, recently bankrupt, a clothing boutique that failed, money troubles, ego troubles. The kind of man who doesn't ask for directions. The kind of man who doesn't admit he's lost. And something else. Egbert had been to the American West before. He fancied himself an outdoorsman. He had an off-road guidebook. He'd circled a route called the Mengel Pass, a punishing 4-wheel drive track through the Panamint Mountains. A route you do not attempt in a rented family minivan in July. But Egbert had tried. And when the Plymouth Voyager couldn't make it, he'd kept pushing. Until 2 tires blew. Until the van died. Then, Mahood theorized, they'd gotten out. And here's where every previous searcher had gone wrong. They hadn't walked south toward the valley. They'd walked north, up, over the pass. Because that's where Egbert's map told them to go. That's where he still believed civilization waited on the other side. He led his family, 2 small children, up a mountain in 120-degree heat, carrying maybe a gallon of water between them. Egbert Rimkus didn't die lost in the desert. He died certain he knew the way. Mahood spent years on this. He hiked the terrain himself. He interviewed locals. He studied weather records from July 1996. He mapped possible routes using Egbert's stubbornness as a compass. And in 2008, he published everything online. A blog post, thousands of words, photos, coordinates, a theory so detailed it read like a confession.
The FBI ignored him. The Park Service ignored him. He was just some retired cop with a hobby. But two other desert enthusiasts read that blog post. Men named Les Walker and Emma Walker, a father and his adult daughter. Hikers, searchers, believers. They loaded their trucks. They packed water. They drove into the Panamints with Mayhood's coordinates in their GPS. It was November 2009, 13 years and 4 months after the Germans disappeared. And halfway up a remote ridge, Les Walker looked down at the ground and saw a human bone bleached white by 13 summers of sun. Act 3. The Deviant. The killer wasn't a man. It was a mindset. Let's be honest about something. This case doesn't have a killer in the traditional sense. No psychopath, no predator, no stranger in the dark. The killer in this story is pride. The killer is the refusal to turn around. Egbert Rimkus was not a monster. He was something more common, more dangerous. He was a certain kind of man. The kind who buys a guidebook and believes he's now an expert. The kind who sees a warning sign and reads it as a suggestion. The kind who hears his girlfriend ask, "Are you sure?" and answers, "Of course I'm sure," when he is not in any way sure. Investigators reconstructed the family's final drive from physical evidence. It reads like a horror novel written in tire tracks. They passed the ghost town of Warm Springs, signed the guest book, kept going. The road got worse, rockier, narrower. A sane driver turns around here. They kept going. They reached a sign that literally said, "Four-wheel drive recommended." Their minivan was not four-wheel drive. It had a luggage rack and child seats and a German map. They kept going. They hit Mengel Pass itself, a staircase of boulders that experienced Jeep owners approach with caution. The Plymouth Voyager scraped bottom, bounced, crunched. They kept going. Somewhere past the pass, in a canyon called Gola Wash, the tires finally gave up. Two blown, two flattened on the rim. The van lurched to a dead stop wedged between rocks. And here, in this moment, Egbert Rimkus made his final decision. The decision that killed his son, that killed his girlfriend, that killed her little boy. He did not stay with the van. Park rangers will tell you, stay with your vehicle. A car is visible from the air. A car holds shade. A car is a landmark. A car is, itself, the message in the bottle. But a vehicle is also an admission of failure. And Egbert Rimkus could not admit failure. Not in front of his girlfriend. Not in front of his son. Not to himself. So he looked at his map. He pointed north. He said, "We are close. It is not far. We walk over the ridge and we find a town." It was more than 20 miles to the nearest road, over a mountain, in July, with children. Cornelia went with him. She trusted him. The 11-year-old went. He had to. The 4-year-old, Max, had no choice in anything. He was just a small boy in sandals holding his mother's hand. They started walking uphill, into heat that melts the soles of boots, past rocks too hot to touch. The water ran out fast. 4 people, maybe a gallon between them, climbing 2,000 feet of elevation. Somewhere, one of the boys started crying. Somewhere, Cornelia started begging to rest. Somewhere, Egbert promised the town was just over the next ridge. It wasn't.
Nothing was over the next ridge. Nothing was over the ridge after that. They walked into geography that does not forgive. And at some point, the coroner would later estimate within 24 to 48 hours, they stopped walking. All 4 of them collapsed, somewhere up there. The desert closed over them like a hand, and for 13 years, nobody knew where. Act 4. The Trap. A retired cop drew a map. 13 years later, the desert gave up its dead. November 14th, 2009. The Panamint Mountains. Les Walker and his daughter Emma are following coordinates from a blog post written by a man they've never met. They're on foot, off trail, in country so remote, the silence has its own weight. And then Les looks down. A bone, bleached, clearly human, clearly a long time in the sun. A few feet away, scraps of fabric, faded, European cut, a shoe. Emma radios for help. The search and rescue teams who mocked Tom Mayhood for a decade suddenly scramble helicopters. They airlift to the coordinates. They expand outward in a grid. Over the next days, they find them, all 4. Not together, spread across a slope, as if the family had splintered in their final hours, as if the children had been left behind first, gently, while the adults pushed on looking for help that was never coming. They found small bones, the bones of a 4-year-old boy. They found small bones, the bones of a 4-year-old boy. The forensic team worked carefully. DNA samples went to a lab. Dental records came from Germany. Within weeks, the identifications were confirmed. Egbert Rimkus, Cornelia Meyer, Georg, 11, Max, 4. The Death Valley Germans, found after 13 years, almost exactly where Tom Mayhood had said they would be. The FBI issued a brief statement. The Park Service issued a brief statement. Nobody in an official uniform mentioned the retired cop with the blog. Of course they didn't. But the desert knew. The Walker family knew. And the German families, who had waited 13 years for proof their loved ones existed, knew. Tom Mayhood traveled to the recovery site. He stood on the ridge where Egbert had died. He looked out over the terrain that had held the secret. He didn't celebrate. He didn't do interviews. He wrote one more blog post. Quiet, matter of fact. He said he was glad the families had answers. He said the desert was done with him. The coroner's report was gentle. Exposure, dehydration, heat. The technical language of a death that took hours and felt like days. But there was one more detail, a detail that broke the hearts of the forensic team. The children had been placed in the shade. What little shade existed under a rock overhang, small bones arranged with care. Someone, Cornelia probably, had tried to protect them, even at the end. Even when there was nothing left to do but die. She had laid her 4-year-old son down in the coolest spot she could find. Then she had walked a little further and fallen. The mother didn't die trying to escape. She died choosing where her children would rest. That's not a crime scene. That's a shrine. And somewhere out there, Egbert Rimkus had died too, further up the slope. Still moving, still convinced, probably, that help was just over the next ridge. He was wrong. He had always been wrong. And his family had paid for it in a currency no one should ever have to spend. Act 5. The Void. No villain, no mystery, just a man who wouldn't turn around. Here's the thing about this case that nobody wants to say out loud. There is no justice here. There is nothing to prosecute. There is no verdict. The only guilty party died of thirst on a mountainside 13 years before the bodies were found. And that's the hardest kind of tragedy. The kind without a villain to hate. The kind where blame and love are the same person. The German families mourned. They had small funerals. They took the remains home. Egbert was buried. Cornelia was buried. The boys were buried. Case closed. Genuinely. Finally. But it left behind a kind of residue, a moral stain. Because every park ranger, every search and rescue volunteer, every desert veteran, they all looked at this case and saw the same thing. It was preventable. Every single step of that drive, every single decision, every single, "I'm sure, keep going." Those were choices. Egbert Rimkus chose to ignore warnings that were literally painted onto signs. He chose to keep driving. He chose to leave the van. He chose the direction they walked. And his children, his girlfriend, they had no real choice. They had trust. Trust in a man who did not deserve it. Tom Mayhood went quiet after the recovery. He'd spent 8 years on this. He'd hiked the ridges. He'd built the maps. He'd been right when the professionals had been wrong. But being right didn't feel like winning. It felt like confirmation of the worst thing a human being can imagine. That a family had suffered exactly the way he'd guessed. And no one could have saved them. The Park Service added new signs, bigger signs, more warnings in German, in French, in Japanese. They added ranger check-ins for backcountry routes. They changed some rental car policies. Small bureaucratic comfort. 13 years late. 4 people short. Every summer since, tourists vanish in Death Valley. Every summer. Different names, same story. They take a wrong turn. They push too hard. They believe the desert is a picture instead of a predator. The rangers pull bodies out of the same canyons. They find dehydrated hikers next to their rental cars. They find fathers who walked away from the van because they were sure, so sure, that help was over the next ridge. It never is. The Death Valley Germans are not a cautionary tale. They're a recurring nightmare. A case study that keeps restaging itself every July, with fresh victims, fresh mourning families, fresh German, Japanese, French, American last words, spoken into the same indifferent heat. The desert doesn't learn, and apparently, neither do we. Epilogue. What remains is not a mystery. What remains is a warning no one reads. Egbert Rimkus took his family into Death Valley on July 22, 1996. By July 24th, almost certainly, all 4 of them were dead. It took 13 years to find them. It took a retired cop with a hobby to succeed where the FBI had failed. Cornelia Meyer was 28 years old. She liked to travel. She liked to laugh. Her son Max was 4. He liked dinosaurs. He liked his mother's voice. Georg Rimkus was 11. He wanted to see the American West. His father had promised him an adventure. They got one. The Panamint Mountains still stand over that slope.
The wind still moves across the rocks where Cornelia laid her boy in the shade. The bones are gone, taken home, buried under European earth. But something else remains up there. Something you can feel if you make the hike. A quiet place, where love tried its hardest and geography didn't care. 4 tourists went into Death Valley. 4. And the only thing more final than the desert is the silence